Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
6:37 now on this very busy Tuesday morning. Good Lord. We've got a full plate ahead of us. Full slate ahead of us. We're eating a full plate of news. Help me out.
Nothing here.
Come on. You got it. Coming up at 7:35, Adam Gillette, Accuracy in Media. You know, he's been pushing these anti-Semites and terrorists on college campuses and exposing them. 8:05, Andy McCarthy on the first day of the Trump trial. And then 8:35, Philly Ocean, Yachtly Crew. Let's go. Margaritaville. Right now, though, Mark Miller, now he is senior attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation. And he wrote an amicus brief in yesterday's Supreme Court arguments, a really, really important case. And Mark Miller, this has not gotten a lot of attention, but this could be a game changer. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Larry.
It's the city of Grants Pass versus Johnson. And the idea here is that for the longest time, there's been this, you tell me if I'm wrong here, but there's been this lower court decision that says that a city cannot criminalize people sleeping on the streets unless they provide an adequate shelter for them. And a bunch of cities like San Francisco, Los Angeles, really the entire state of California, have used this thing as a fig leaf. They've been able to say to the citizens, geez, we'd love to do something about all the criminal vagrancy in our city, but we've got this court ruling that says that we're not allowed to. Is that what was argued yesterday?
Yeah, that is really what they were getting at. And in fact, was some of the briefs made that point that cities are trying to use this as an excuse not to deal with their public policy issue, which is resolving these homeless encampments that, of course, we have in D.C. and have especially on the West Coast. Yeah. The argument in the Supreme Court were basically about, the cities were trying to say that, look, we are trying to do something about this, but the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out West had tied their hands.
So what is the fundamental right here that has been defended up until this point? If a person cannot afford a home, they have the right to just sleep wherever they want in a public place, or it goes beyond sleeping. These tent cities come up, and they basically take up residence in public parks, on beaches, wherever they want, under freeway overpasses, over by the Kennedy Center, over by Union Station here in D.C., and the city has no right to evict them?
I mean, that is what the argument was yesterday. In fact, your incredulity is kind of where Chief Justice Roberts was coming at it with the lawyer for the homeless. The advocate for the homeless was basically making that point, that this is no different than punishing someone just for being homeless. She was refusing to accept that it isn't just that you're being homeless, but rather you're homeless and you're sleeping or camping on public property. You're interfering with other people's ability to use that public property, of course, these camps, as we all know.
But, Mark, it's interesting. It's even more than that. It's you're endangering other people. For instance, I'm sure there's crime related to these sort of homeless camps. But also it's a public health thing. I mean, where are these people going to the bathroom? This, the garbage, the food that's left out there attracts rats and other vermin. I mean, this does become a public health issue. Is that addressed?
That did come up. And in fact, this, to be basic about it, urination, defecation, the drug needles, and the costs to the cities that are imposed based on this ruling are pretty, astronomical and horrifying in terms of the, some of the bodily functions we're talking about. And yes, absolutely, the justices were dealing with it. The ultimate argument the homeless are trying to make is that being homeless and being punished is wrong. They say they're just like drug addicts. The Supreme Court said, the Warren Court said 50 years ago, you can't punish someone just for being a drug addict. But Roberts and the majority of the justices were pushing back on that. They're saying you're not being punished for being homeless. Right. You're being punished for sleeping on public property, camping on public property, for the camps, basically.
Is there an obligation for a municipality to provide an alternative or a shelter of some sort for individuals if they can't afford to live in that city?
Well, I think the point here is the Constitution doesn't solve all these problems. I think we can elect people who have empathy and sympathy for the homeless and do try to help them with the mental illness, with the drug addiction. But there's a difference between trying to help versus being required not to even handle them.
Via constitutional right. Well, and it's also, Mark, I'm sorry, because it's been warped in such a way that it's like, listen, if I ever, God forbid, lost my job and I couldn't afford the home that I live in right now, I wouldn't expect to to be provided a home in the neighborhood that I live in. You know, I'd get a job, I'd make less money, so I'd move to a more affordable place. But instead, this ruling up until now from, I think it was the Ninth Circuit, it's been warped in such a way that people can demand, you know what, I deserve beachfront property. The people can live, you know, right off off the Potomac here in D.C. I have a right to live in the most expensive place in the region. You can't tell me that I can't. It's not my fault that you haven't made affordable housing available in the neighborhood that I choose. That's literally how this has been interpreted.
Yeah, 2 points real quick on that. Number one, absolutely part of the argument was about this idea that somehow you have a right to be in a certain town. Ed Needler, who was the lawyer for the federal government here, and he was trying to blaze a middle path. He kept saying that somehow people here in Grants Pass, if they've lived there all their lives, they have a right to be in Grants Pass, even if, as Robert said, there's a homeless shelter right over the city line. Yeah. And you can see the justice is saying that's ridiculous. And then second, Gorsuch's point was very similar to the point you're making. Look, most people could probably find somewhere else to live if they did lose their job. And if they truly can't, then they can make an argument that this is a necessity. You know, they're Jean Valjean. They have no choice to have robbed the store, and maybe we'll have sympathy for them. But that doesn't mean you have a constitutional right to live wherever you want, to sleep wherever you want.
So how do you think the arguments went? What's this? Because this really could, I mean, I can't understate or overstate how the domino effect on public policy that this could have if the Supreme Court strikes down this lower court ruling.
Yeah, I think that the Supreme Court is poised to vacate the decision. There was at least 5 justices, I think, maybe as many as 7. Justice Kagan was hard to predict where she was because the lawyer for the city was struggling to understand what Kagan was saying. But at least 5 seem to want to think the Ninth Circuit was wrong. There's no right to sleep on public property. But where they're going to go with that, I don't know. I do think they're going to say that, in general, that cities should have more of a free hand to address the homeless crisis. Justice Kavanaugh made that point, that people who help the homeless, every day it changes, and you can't have the courts interfering with that.
Is there also forgive me, just one more question. Is there a middle lane here? You know, there was a time when the beat cop would walk around the city square, and when the sun rises and people are waking up and starting their day, then the hobo who was sleeping on the park bench, and you'd say, all right, move it along there, laddie, move it along. You can't stay here. Sleeping, you know, it's like, yes, you're poor. You don't have a place to sleep, so you can sleep on the bench. It's living. It's taking up residence. Is there sort of a fine line there?
Yeah, I think absolutely. The city's point here is that law enforcement is not going to be egregiously hostile to the homeless. The homeless advocates will say, we don't agree with that. But yes, their point is that this is something we've been dealing with in America for decades, and we've been able to handle it without the federal courts telling the police officer, the Joe cop on the street, how to handle the homeless.
Yeah, or the one, the stereotype one that I had with the Irish accent there. That I just did. That's my impression of a cop. Move it along there, laddie. It's time to get to work now. Mark, thanks so much for joining us. Great stuff. I'm very excited to see how this comes. Great work with the Pacific Legal Foundation, always on the right side of these issues. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you, Larry.
It's 6:45 WMAL traffic.